Standley.
Well, ladies and gentlemen and distinguished co-panelists, indeed, I think going from Geneva and landing up in Tel Aviv is the way to go. I know time's a little bit tough in Europe, and there's a general mood of gloom and pessimism, but I just want to start off with a resolutely optimistic note and a very personal optimistic note by saying that I find myself a very, very fortunate person, a very happy man here, not only because I have the great job of representing the European Union and having a great team of colleagues, but also just the fantastic challenge and opportunity of representing the EU here in Israel, but also because today on this panel, in the context of this conference on this very weighty subject of, and here I read, multiculturalism, communication, democracy and politics in Europe, we have this panel, and I'm extremely fortunate because there's no specific subtitle for my presentation, which gives me a little bit of freedom and flexibility, because I know we're going to be hearing some much more expert and erudite interventions from my colleagues. And the only instruction I got from Professor Bruno was don't speak for more than 10 minutes. I'm going to be very short, and I'm going to abuse my position of being here, standing before you on this occasion, because this, as you may know, is one of a series of events we've organized this year around the country in the framework of the celebration of Europe Day, which is actually, it was on the 9th of May. And this year, therefore, was the 62nd anniversary of what we consider to be the founding moment of European integration. And I'm probably preaching and speaking to people who know this even better than I do, but just to summarize, when the French Foreign Minister, Mr. Schuman, made his historic suggestion to his German counterpart that two strategic elements of the military-industrial complex of those times, the steel and the coal communities or sectors, should be jointly managed under a supranational authority, which really then set in motion a process of European integration, which has gone on for the last 62 years, and which I think has brought us, and I believe the world, outstanding benefits. And so what I'd just like to do in 2 or 3 minutes, because time is short, and in the context and in the spirit of the celebration of Europe Day, is really just to spend 2 minutes, not so much on the subject that is immediately before us, though I'm going to touch on it, as you'll hear, but just to go over some of what I see from a personal point of view. And I was saying to some of my co-panelists just now as we were coming in that I may be British, but I'm first and foremost a European. I define myself as a European of British origin. But from a personal point of view, what have been some of the achievements and what have been what are some of the challenges which are facing us in the European Union. And I think I may be restating the obvious, but it's very important when we look at what we have succeeded. And again, in a particular context, a moment in history, when most people, when they think about the European Union, think of the negatives. I think it's important for us to take this opportunity to take stock of what we have achieved and what contributions European integration has made, not only to European citizens, but even beyond. And the first, it's obvious, is peace. The fact that we've had 60-odd years of uninterrupted peace in Europe. This is a completely unique set of circumstances, and one that I think represents and the fulfillment beyond their wildest dreams, I think, of the original founders of European integration. And now I think we have reached the point, I don't want to be too bold, but where it becomes extremely difficult to imagine that war could break out between member countries of the European Union. And again, if you put that in the context of broader European history of the last thousands of years, this is an exceptional achievement. We've obviously had terrible war on the European continent in the last decades, most notably in the Western Balkans. But again, it's important to emphasize that that conflict took place precisely in countries which were not member countries of the European Union. I think a second major achievement, though it's sometimes controversial, and I know that we are accused of sometimes pontificating, of projecting values, but we do believe that we are a union, an integration system, which is based first and foremost on values. And I'm sure we will be hearing issues of definitions of what is Europe, what is a European identity. I maintain that we are not a geographical concept. We are not certainly a religious concept. We are certainly not a racial concept. We are a concept of unity in values. That is our core fundamental attachment. Obviously, another major achievement has been the enlargement of the European Union, starting from 6 countries in the 1950s, now to 27, and very soon, in 6 weeks' time, we'll have Croatia joining us as a 28th member country of the European Union. That, again, is a fantastic achievement, which has contributed very, very significantly and directly to the reunification of the European continent in a way that, again, was, I think, exceptionally rapid and exceptionally successful following the collapse of the Soviet Union. And we have our distinguished colleague and friend, the ambassador of Bulgaria here. the incorporation of new countries in a short period of time, I think, was made possible by the twin pull, the twin magnetism of the aspiration to join the European Union and also of NATO. And I think that has been another fantastic achievement. One more, and I realize I'm going very quickly, but I'm under time pressure, is the continued commitment of the European Union, and again, the projection of that value in the field of multilateralism. We obviously function as a grouping of countries together who are committed to the belief and persuaded of the effect of cooperating, of creating a situation of increased mutual interdependence. Our security increases as a direct function of the extent to which we are exposed and vulnerable to each other. Now, I appreciate that passing this message in a context such as the one in which Israel finds itself is a bit strange, because Israel most unfortunately still finds itself surrounded by hostile neighbors, where Israel's security, first and foremost, comes from strong defense, strong borders in the face of continued hostility from the neighboring countries. In the European Union, obviously, we have taken the opposite, and we have been fortunate enough to be able to continue to take the opposite path of decreasing our defenses, opening our borders, and as I said, exposing ourselves more and more in a process of mutual vulnerability, where the cost of engaging in hostility against your neighbors, the cost to yourself, becomes so great that you would never think of doing it. And then the last major achievement is the evolution of the European Union from being what we always refer to ourselves as an economic giant and a political pygmy into more of a global and a very significant global player. This has been an evolution which may be obvious to everybody now in this room, but which certainly for the first few decades of the European Union, or the European Economic Community as it was in its first days, was certainly not evident or obvious. But the fact is that in order to continue not only our growth, our prosperity, but also the projection of our values, there has been a very systematic trend that has been put in motion starting in the 1970s for the European Union to be a much more active and engaged player in foreign policy, in security and defense matters. And that is something which we're seeing constantly, and most recently the adoption of the Lisbon Treaty, which was the last big fundamental rehauling of the way the European Union functions, was designed very much with the objective in mind of pulling together all of the different elements and the competences and powers of the European Union in order for it to be a more effective global player. So that very briefly is how I see the last 60 years of European, 62 years now, of European integration on the positive side of the ledger. Now, clearly, we're going to be talking about challenges which face the European Union. And there, I think we have to be very wide-eyed and open-eyed in making a cool and rational assessment of some of the challenges which face us. And now, indeed, is a moment when some of those challenges are becoming increasingly evident. And I would like to start, again, with the issue of values. I think maybe most of you were expecting me to start with the euro crisis or the economic and financial crisis in the European Union. We'll come to that in a second. I think the most important challenge that we have to continue to address is the protection of our commitment to fundamental values. Because of the financial crisis that we're facing, we've seen already the rise of populism. We've seen the danger that can come from an erosion of democratic values and how that can affect political processes. And I believe that we have to continually re-engage ourselves and be particularly vigilant with regard to protecting what lies at the core of the European project, which is belief in the value of fundamental values that we hold dear. And in that context, I will then move on to the subject which my colleagues on the panel are certainly going to address much more profoundly: multiculturalism and identity. I've already stated my position that I believe we are a union of values. How we deal with sustaining those values, adjusting them in the face of constant change, of immigration, this is something that I believe will be elucidated and made clearer by the co-panelists. Obviously, we have the Eurozone crisis. This is the deepest crisis that we face in the history of the European Union. I'm sure that we will overcome it because there's absolutely no option. We have to go forward. We have to learn from the experience, and I think the history of the European integration project has been based on overcoming reverses, overcoming difficult situations, and moving on, and I'm absolutely persuaded that will be the case. But we certainly are, and it's in the newspapers every day, facing now this very clear dilemma between fiscal stabilization or reducing deficits on the one hand through austerity measures, and on the other hand, promoting growth, employment, and giving the people, and especially the younger generations, a sense of future prospects. How we square that circle is the challenge facing the politicians and the technicians of these matters, but it clearly is a major challenge. And then the last 2 points, the last 2 challenges that I'd like to identify, one of them is related very much to the subject at hand, which is the demography, the demographic and immigration challenge. We are an aging population. Over the next 50 years, all of the projections point to the population of the European Union increasing by just 2% over the next 50 years. So our population will be stagnant, but it will be much older. On the other hand, therefore, we need either to produce younger people, more children, and in the absence of that happening, we need to have more immigration. And immediately, the issue of how to have a well-balanced immigration policy, which is both legal, which meets with social approval, and which addresses with a sensitive manner the issues of identity, which are going to be touched upon later. This is a major challenge. And the final one, the final challenge I'd like to identify is maybe a slightly more technical one, but it's one that I have very much at heart as a European civil servant, is the question, the balance between what we call the community method of organizing our work and the intergovernmental work method. I mean, we're moving into technicalities of European integration, but to me and to my colleagues, they are of fundamental importance because they address the issue of how the common interest is to be identified in the decision-making process. In other words, are the results, are the decisions that are going to be taken really the result of the common interest of all of the member states of the European Union being taken fully into consideration, or is it going to be the result of a few more powerful centers of power and influence in a way shaping the decision and imposing it on the others? I believe, I think my colleagues, but it's a professional, what they call in French, a déformation professionnelle. It's my failing as a European civil servant is to believe that we need more community method, we need more Europe. This is a way, by coming together, by increasing the attempts to identify the common interest, we are able to overcome the difficulties and really to continue to prosper and to remain true to our values. So that was a very, very quick, and I think I was just about within 10 minutes, overflight of what, from a fairly personal point of view, I see as some of the key achievements of the last 60-odd years, but also some of the major challenges. And I, as I said, really look forward to hearing some much more expert analysis of 2 or 3 of the fundamental ones which relate to this issue of identity and diversity. Thank you very much indeed.